of foods and things like that. So when we take the time, make a little effort, be more conscious about what we're putting into our bodies, then what we're doing is we're supercharging ourselves so that, like I said, whenever we come across any sort of pathogens or viruses or whatnot, our body has defenses that can help us on the front line.
Perfect. That was so interesting. So now that we're live, I'll kind of try to sum it up. So you sell a make your own elderberry syrup kit with warming spices, organic berries, and instructions, I assume. And then you can add this syrup to various drinks to boost your immune system in the winter or in the summer or whatever.
Yeah, I have it in my water kefir right now.
That's so lovely. I like that you have it as an easy kit. I was just thinking before we got on, I used to make kombucha and I just let it go. And, one reason I think is sometimes the culture you're immersed in can shift. So I don't know. I feel like I don't have many DIY friends around here and it's different and stuff. I'm in Phoenix. It's different now than Portland. But also, yeah, it's sometimes it's just it feels like a hassle. And if it's easy in a kit, I could maybe do it with my son. I really like that idea. Then he's learning as well. So I'm going to have to get that. So I put the main site here on your links, kombuchakamp.com. So you can just look up the elderberry syrup, right?
Exactly. Go to shop. That's where all of the items for sale are. And the kit is nice because it comes in either organic cane sugar or raw honey. So you can choose your sweetener.
Okay, perfect. So you said you put that in a kefir. So tell us, what is a kefir?
Sure. So, we're bacteria farmers. That means we cultivate cultures. And the 4 cultures we work with are, of course, kombucha. We're Kombucha Kamp. We also do Jun, which is kombucha's raw honey cousin. And then we have water kefir and milk kefir. Now, they're not actually related. Kefir in this instance is a term of convenience. Because they're cultivated in a similar fashion, they picked up a similar name. So tibikos might be a more traditional name for water kefir, but they're basically little crystals that eat sugar. So it's super easy to make. It's sugar, water, and the crystals, and that converts into a healthy beverage. Now it's lighter and sweeter than kombucha, and milk kefir grains and water kefir grains, they're not as hardy as the bacterial cellulose created by the kombucha culture. So these cultures, we can just stick them in a hotel, ignore them, slightly abuse them, and they're still going to be okay. Water kefir grains and milk kefir, if we leave them too long, they can eat themselves. So they're just a little more delicate. So we tend to make them in smaller batches. But the nice thing about the kefir, because it has that sweeter profile, if you have folks who find the kombucha too intense, they can either do the kefir or you can mix them. So now you're getting the benefits of both into a single glass. You're shifting that flavor profile, but you're also getting the benefits of both of those beverages.
Okay, I want to compare the profiles of those in a sec, but since we dove right in, let me pause a sec and just introduce you, tell people more about you. Whoops, I just closed my calendar on accident, so one sec. Pull you back up. I was also just remembering, while we have another little moment of downtime, that I got to see you at your book signing in Portland. So nice, because I have so many online friends who are only online friends, but it's nice when you've actually been around someone and been able to take them in.
We've had a hug. We've shared microbes.
Oh, we have. Okay, so Hannah Crum, our guest today, is also known as the Kombucha Mamma. She pioneered Kombucha Kamp, an educational workshop, in 2004 out of her small Los Angeles kitchen. Along with her husband, Alex Ligori, they created KombuchaKamp.com, the top educational site with a mission to change the world one gut at a time by providing quality information, quality cultures, and quality customer support. Hannah tours as a popular speaker about kombucha, fermentation, and bacteriosapiens at corporate and health conferences, fermentation festivals, and events around the world. As an outgrowth of their corporate consulting, industry reporting, and class marketing efforts, Hannah and Alex co-founded Kombucha Brewers International in 2014 to unite and advocate for the commercial kombucha bottling industry around the world. Through Kombucha Kamp's videos, blog posts, and online support communities, and award-winning Amazon bestseller, The Big Book of Kombucha. They serve as mentors to millions of homebrewers and commercial producers around the world. Visit Kombucha Kamp with a K for all your kombucha brewing supplies, tips, recipes, and more. And Hannah has a free recipe guide in the links there that you can check out. So today we're going to focus on what we kind of already started today, is like a show and tell and a how-to, and I'll ask some questions along the way. And if anyone has questions as we go, you are welcome. So the question I wanted to ask is, how does like the profile of a kombucha compared to a kefir? I know that there are some yeasts in kombucha, which occasionally people can be sensitive to. Is that any different in kefir?
So they're going to be completely different organisms.
Okay.
Yeah, kombucha is an acetic acid ferment like vinegar, which is why it gets that tangy flavor. And those organic acids are what help support a healthy liver. They help to release toxins from the body that are stored in our fat cells. And, you know, that's where a lot of their anti-cancer properties come in, is because of the polyphenols in the tea. So just tea is an amazing food. Vinegar is an amazing food. We combine them together. We've got this superpower known as kombucha. Water kefir is a very different type of organism. I want to say Zymomonas mobilis is the dominant organism. Not that most people have heard of it, but
big word.
2 words, yeah, exactly right. But it just has a different host of properties. And again, a lot, you know, it's kind of interesting. Over the years, I found you have like kombucha people and you have kefir people. Sometimes they'll mix, but a lot of times people sort of pick which ferment resonates with them most. As I mentioned, though, especially if you're new to fermentation, kefir with its lighter, sweeter profile can be a great way in. Again, mixing it with the tangier kombucha is a great way to get the benefits of both. And then kombucha is great for folks who just are resonating with that more intense acidity and the organic acids it creates.
I think I'm a kombucha person so far. I love kombucha taste. I've made it a good number of times. I did try to make kefir once. I don't think I got it right. I just didn't keep pursuing it. Is it more finicky to make?
It can be, again, because it's sweeter. I feel like if you're a kombucha person, it can be a little too sweet. That's how it hits my palate. So actually my water kefir has been sitting in the bottle continuing to ferment for at least 2 weeks, because I just want more of that sugar to be fermented out of it. So that's where sort of choose your own adventure comes into play with all of these ferments, to find, you know, what resonates with your body now.
Could you even, like the drink you have, put in the elderberry syrup, a little kefir, kombucha, and then just water or sparkling water? Is that allowed?
That is totally allowed. And that's exactly what we do with kombucha that's a little too tangy. It's just like when we consume hard liquor, because, you know, we're always doing both at the same time. In any case, what I mean by that is like when you add an ice cube to that scotch, that shifts the pH, it opens up the flavor profile, it brings other flavor elements to the forefront. A similar thing happens when we add water to our kombucha. So it's going to shift that sourness. It's going to make it easier for us to consume and enjoy. And it also helps with hydration. So I like to say there's no such thing as waste when it comes to kombucha, because even if it's too sour and we pour it down the drain, now it's acting like a drain cleaner. But think of it like that, like it's unclogging the pipes as it works its way through your system. But we want that more palatable, refreshing flavor, and that's where adding the elderberry syrup, adding a little bit of water, all of that is just going to help, especially for your more finicky drinkers who maybe don't enjoy that full-powered kombucha flavor. Yeah. And actually, if you don't mind, sorry to interrupt, I was going to start steeping the tea because that takes the longest.
Oh yeah, go for it.
So just and I'll just to give folks a little background, kombucha is, as we mentioned, fermented tea. So tea is Camellia sinensis. It's a magnolia type plant. It also comes in many different colors and flavors, but it all comes from the same plant. How it's grown, when the leaves are picked, how they're processed, that's what's going to dictate black tea, green tea, white tea, oolong, etc. So we make our kombucha with Hannah's specialty blend, which is an organic blend of green tea. Exactly right. Green tea, black tea, white tea, rooibos, which is not tea, and yerba mate, also not tea. Rooibos is naturally sweet and it's highly valued. It's actually a legume that's processed like tea from South Africa and has an incredibly long history of use for a wide range of issues, including topically for skin ailments and things like that. Yerba mate is a member of the holly family. It's related to yaupon, which is the member we find here in the United States, but it's smoked and it has a nice smoky flavor. It's got caffeine, but it also has other nutrients that don't, so it prevents that sort of coffee spike that you get out of it. Again, there's not a ton of it in here. It's just here for flavor and benefit. And so when we brew kombucha, it's typically, 3 to 5, 4 to 6 teaspoons per gallon. And a teaspoon is about equivalent to 1 tea bag. So I'm just going to throw some tea in here.
So you said 3 to 4 per gallon. And you're making
That's exactly right. And actually,
okay.
I forgot it. Not throwing it in there. I'm going to throw it in my tea bag. So let me start over.
3 to 4 teaspoons per gallon. Yeah,
or 4 to 6. So like if you were using tea bags, which is what I started with, brewing kombucha, and then one day I'm looking at like the pile of each individual sachet packet I've ripped open and there's all this garbage. I was like, oh no, this isn't very sustainable. How do I change that? So what I decided was I would make a loose leaf tea, which costs less money because loose leaf tends to cost less and also doesn't create as much packaging that I then have to throw away.
Good for you. So you said 3 to 4 teaspoons or 4 to 6 tea bags, roughly. Is that right?
Exactly right. And the recipe, you'll find it on our website, is listed there. Now, some people who are more expert at tea will say, well, what temperature? And you certainly can follow whatever temperature is best for that tea. But remember, what we're making here isn't tea to drink. And so in fact, we're going to steep it a little longer, which is why I wanted to get that process started.
Yeah.
The other thing we do is what we call a shortcut method. And so instead of boiling an entire gallon of water, I'm only going to steep the tea in 4 cups. So I'm just going to pour that water in here that I've so you don't even need a stove for this. You can just use an electric tea kettle. Some people might want to make sun tea. So there's a lot of ways in which you can sort of hack the way you do this. So we're just going to let this hang out and steep while we continue to chat.
Okay, because yeah, you can't make it hot, right? You have to make it once it's cool. So we'll add some water.
Should we talk about that? Why?
Yes.
So SCOBY, and I'll pull it out of the bag and you'll get to see it a little bit better. You can see it sort of floating in here. It's kind of like a pancake. It's an acronym, which means it likes to use its initials. So symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. The bacteria build the cellulose structure and the yeast are sort of the floaty bits that hang around in here. Any of you who baked bread know that when you use commercial yeast, there's a temperature range that you have to, that's specific to the yeast because they're temperature sensitive. When we look at the tree of how we're all related, we are more close, human beings are more closely related to yeast than we are to bacteria. And so yeast actually have temperature ranges similar to what we enjoy. Typically, we're wanting to ferment at 75 to 85, with 80 being our sweet spot. For the water, though, anything below 100 degrees is going to be suitable for us to add the culture. So by doing a shortcut, we're steeping the tea, then we're going to add our cool water, and that's going to bring the temperature down quickly so we can immediately place our SCOBY in there. We don't have to come back hours later. We don't have to wait overnight or anything in order to do that.
Okay. So you said between 75 and 80 degrees for the fermentation is
correct.
Kind of where you want to be. Okay. So if somebody's like, it's cold in my house, do you put it near an oven or like, how do you keep it a little warmer?
Those are absolutely some of the ways you can do it, but we also sell different heaters that you can put onto your vessel, because oftentimes you're not wanting to heat the entire house, especially if you live in a cold region. That would be very expensive to do. So by using a heater, you're simply localizing the temperature to your brew so it stays in that ideal temperature range, even if you're putting on an extra sweater.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna wait till this brews. We are brewing it for how many long?
10-15 minutes.
Okay.
So we can continue chatting before we do those next steps. Again, making kombucha is so easy, and you know why I know this? Because I am a terrible cook. And so when I first started getting into kombucha, the fact that I could make it without messing it up was a huge, exciting discovery for me. And part of that is the kombucha, it has a pH that's very acidic on the pH scale, and that is a natural defense mechanism that helps protect everything. also because it's a food, how do we know food's gone bad?
Moldy?
Exactly right. And what does mold look like? Those concentric circles you see on the slice of bread or the piece of cheese. And oftentimes we'll just cut that off and eat the remaining bread or cheese. Sometimes we throw it all away. It's the same with kombucha. You know, you'll hear people say, well, how do I know if there's bad bacteria in there? Again, it's food. It's going to communicate with us in the same way that food communicates, and that is visually. Now with kombucha, and because we have so many folks with compromised immune systems, we do not recommend trying to salvage a moldy batch. And that's why we create a SCOBY hotel. So a little thing about these SCOBYs, they are abundance in action. And they're a great metaphor for human beings as well. Basically, if you give an organism what it needs to thrive, it will. It's just, these are simpler organisms, so we can keep giving them the same fuel and they're going to thrive. Humans, of course, we need more variety, more diversity. So that said, as long as we're feeding the kombucha culture the tea and sugar it needs, it's going to keep making more of them. For some folks, that can feel overwhelming. I don't know if you remember, did you have leftovers?
Yeah. And then if you haven't given them away, then they get kind of gross in their hotel. Well, they're not gross. It's just, it's overwhelming.
It can feel overwhelming. So this is where I tell people, hey, even if you have to throw it in the garbage, you're probably helping to break down the landfill. So when you throw them away, you're doing a good thing.
Or you can use them in your own garden, compost or whatever.
Compost, you can eat them. Chickens fight over them. Lots of pets benefit from consuming them. We can put them on our face like a face mask. Our skin really loves it. So there's lots of different uses. People are developing them into all kinds of biofilms and making, biodegradable fabrics out of them, or growing sensors for biochemical processes inside of our bodies.
Wow.
So there's actually a lot of neat things they're figuring out they can do with this amazing bacterial cellulose.
Or you can make more batches, or you can offer them to friends, right? The SCOBYs.
Exactly.
My neighbor was just telling me about like a local Facebook group called Free Chandler, and I guess there's like Free LA and Free whatever. So do you want to just say, hey, if you want to make kombucha, I've got a SCOBY I can leave out for you or whatever. That's great. I think that's a really nice thing to do.
And lots of people like to give them away and gift them away. But if you don't have anyone locally, that's where we can be your trusted source. Our products are brewed in a federally inspected facility, state inspected facility. We use all organic ingredients. So it's not just sort of hanging out in a random stranger's environment. Not that that's necessarily bad, but at least it gives you a peace of mind if you want to know where your culture is coming from.
So the one you had in the plastic there is an example of one you mail out if someone purchases one.
Exactly right. And it's packed in 1 cup of really strong starter liquid. So like if you were to try to drink this, it probably would not taste good. And that's because our cultures are guaranteed. So we ensure that by using a really strong starter. In fact, I have some pH strips if you want to see. pH is not necessarily going to tell us that the brew is ready to consume because it's too gross of a measure. But what it does do is it tells us that it's safe from a food safety perspective. So the pH on kombucha, as I mentioned, is very acidic. So it's these strips test from 0 to 6. So it's a little bit lower on the pH scale. And what we're looking for is between a 2.5 and a 3.5. So here's my unused strip color. If you can sort of see that, it's like a faint green. I'm going to dip it in this liquid, and it's immediately changed color. And it's right within, it's right at like our 2.5 range when we match it up here, hopefully. I'm angling that so you can see it. Do you see that?
Yeah, it's kind of faint. Oh, I see what you mean on the top one. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Yeah, so it's right in the correct range. So that indicates it's safe and free from contaminants. Here's the really neat thing, Bridget. There's more good guys than bad guys. And here's what I mean by that. If pathogens were so powerful, we'd already be dead. Right?
True.
By their nature, pathogens are weak. And when you have something that's very acidic, part of why it developed this mechanism is because, again, just like I mentioned before, cleaning out the pipes, those acids cut the biofilms, the bonds that these pathogens might create. It cuts their cell walls so that they can no longer reproduce.
Wow.
And many studies have shown that kombucha will kill things like E. coli, salmonella, listeria, some of these really common food contaminants, either on contact or within a short period of time. And so again, when people are like, oh, get all afraid of making kombucha, in fact, it's actually one of the safest things we can make at home because it has such a great defense mechanism already built in.
So when you say people are afraid about it, they thought, oh, well, like if I make it wrong, it's like the bacteria is going to kill me or something like that.
Or if I touch it with my bare hands.
Right. It's kind of like Earth, like just has its own environment. Okay, cool. That's really interesting. I think that one thing you taught me that is a myth to bust is like, just because even though they sell it at the store in these giant containers, you usually just want to have a little at a time, like with a meal or near a meal, kind of as a tonic, right? Is that correct?
Well, so let's talk about that because these days, right, you know, Americans got a sweet tooth. Why? Because sugar's subsidized, high fructose corn syrup is subsidized, so it's in like all of our food products. And that coats your tongue, it shifts the pH in your body, makes us angry. I don't know. It does a lot of negative things to us. But what it means is that the American palate really craves that sweeter flavor because that's what we've been trained to consume. So you have a lot of commercial brands these days that maybe present lighter offerings. And so those are products that you could consume an entire bottle or you could consume more of. Now, when we're talking about home brew, we're typically on the stronger side of that equation. And that's where the strength of your kombucha, and you'll notice, you'll be able to feel it. But if your kombucha is a little bit stronger, that's where having those smaller serving sizes can help, or as we said before, adding a little water to help with the hydration aspect. Those are ways in which we can enjoy it. And remember, these have nutrients in living form. What do I mean by that? When we buy a pill, oftentimes those nutrients are created in a lab and their chemical structures are not identical to those nutrients that are living. And we've all seen the chemical shapes, whether from chemistry class or because we're all, you know, Google Doc scientists these days or whatever, but those shapes represent a key. Imagine if you try to stick a key in a lock, but it's not the right shape, it's not gonna do what your body needs it to do instantly.
Gotcha.
However, if it has that right shape because it's in a living form or a natural form, your body's gonna instantly be able to recognize that and uptake that nutrient. Now, I'll also say kombucha doesn't have mass doses of a lot of these nutrients. And again, we're talking about quality over quantity. So when we're getting it in that quality form that our body has over, you know, billions of years been able to evolve and develop a relationship with, that's where you're getting nutrient density.
Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, and often when I would make mine at home, it would be kind of easy for it to go too strong, right? There's a quick tipping point there, and then you don't really want a big glass of a super strong. Your body kind of lets you know. So yeah, that's a great tip. So either mix it or just have it in a smaller quantity, something like that.
And it makes a great base for kombucha cocktails.
Oh, it's come up a couple times now, Hannah.
Well, here's the thing, because kombucha specifically supports a healthy liver, it's a little antidote with your poison. So having a kombucha cocktail, you'll get some of the like high and relaxation and energy of the alcohol, but on the other end of it, you won't have the same negative effects. Or if you accidentally overindulge, drinking that kombucha as you go to bed or when you wake up in the middle of the night, this is the voice of experience, but many years ago, having some of that kombucha is just going to help minimize the headache, right? We've seen a lot of, you know, hangover cure little bottles of stuff you buy at 7-Eleven or whatnot. And what do they have? They have B vitamins. And that's exactly what we have in our kombucha, are these B vitamins that help our body to process this, plus the gluconic and glucuronic acid, which support the healthy liver. So it just makes it a lot easier to enjoy your alcohol and not pay the worst price possible.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I bought one prepared, you know, as a kombucha cocktail of some kind. So that's, yeah, it's a good little tip. Okay, what other questions might people feel free to ask on the chat. Oh, I know that another thing that comes up is, well, what if I have candida or I have mold? A lot of people have mold in this community. Can I have kombucha?
This is such a personal question, and I know people have sometimes very polarizing opinions about it. Our philosophy here is trust your gut. What works for my body may not work for your body. And it's you listening to the biofeedback your body's receiving that helps you figure out if it's the right thing for you. So that said, because of the acids, it's creating things like caprylic acid and other things that help to break down candida overgrowth. But if we're not fermenting it enough, you might leave too much residual sugar, which can feed the candida. So it's really about fermenting it to that stronger flavor profile. Again, you can dilute it with the water to make it more palatable. And then listening to your body, because whenever we're trying to get rid of something, right, that candida doesn't want to leave. It's an opportunistic pathogen. And so it's going to make you feel worse before you feel better. But typically within a couple of weeks, and again, every body is different, so your body's going to react differently, you should start to get some relief from it. Now, if that isn't changing, there could be other things going on, SIBO or whatnot. You know, again, kombucha helps some who have different gut ailments, and then it doesn't help for others. So it's really listening to your body, trusting your gut, and doing the thing that your biofeedback is telling you is appropriate for you.
I think that's a great answer. And last week we had a gut expert on, and she said, don't feel like you have to give up things forever. Trust it again later, and because we do want that diversity, we don't want to keep limiting. I think there was a period when I was still really moldy where I just didn't feel good with kombucha, and I gave it up for a while. There was even a little period where there's been a couple times, like I also do coffee enema, and there's been a couple times where I was like, and then I'll be able to again. So it's just, your body changes. And I think if you feel like a lot is too much for you, you can just have a little, even of the commercial type. So yeah, feel free to experiment. One thing I love about kombucha that I talk about, and apple cider vinegar too, is that it helps for glyphosate detox. Is that something you've looked into?
Yes, well, I had my glyphosate numbers tested a few years ago, and mine were on par with Europe. Now, of course, I'm someone who's also been very conscientiously choosing my food. But that said, I did fall into a trap where I was over consuming grass-fed meat and eggs, and my body was starting to have a negative reaction to it. So there is such a thing as, as the old adage is, poison is in the dose, right? So we want to have that diversity present. And if we fall into a rut and overconsume things, they can have a negative impact, even if they're good for us.
And I had my glyphosate tested. It's been a few years now, and it was pretty high, like 75th percentile. And I was like, what? I think that one is pretty variable based on your health history and how burdened you've been, and if it's in your water supply. It's just, so many of my clients are like, I eat 95% organic or whatever, how could I have glyphosate? It's very present in our environment. It lands on things, it's around, and it's persistent, and then you might not clear it very well. So apple cider vinegar, kombucha, I think somebody told me something else recently, and now I've forgotten it, but there isn't much that breaks it down. So you were talking about earlier how it cuts it. I think you were saying, I think that's kind of like the structure of glyphosate can get broken down and sort of cut from the like acidic nature of it. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty powerful. You can do it this way. We had Paleo Valley on a few weeks ago, and they do the capsules as well, if you prefer that. My mom is on here. She was asking for a kombucha cocktail idea.
Yeah, we have some great recipes on our site. And then if you go to our Instagram, we had a link where you could grab a new cocktail guide. We did 3 different cocktails on Instagram TV around the holidays. And so there's some great recipes there and a little mini cocktail guide you can download. Plus there's some in the book as well. There's a lot in the book, actually. So those are some other ways you can find those recipes.
Okay, I don't think I'm following you on Instagram.
Silly. Well, we'll have to I'll make sure I'm following you too.
because we know each other in real life. Oh, here you are. Yep, I wasn't following you. Perfect. Yeah, okay.
So I think we've had about 15 minutes of steeping the tea. So as we can see, it's darkened in color, right? Our tea liquor.
Yeah.
That's what it's called, the technical term, although there's no alcohol in it. Turns this darker color. Now our tea is going to look a little bit lighter than if you're only using black tea. And let me just talk about tea for a second here. You know, kombucha traditionally was made with black tea, and that's where you get sort of that appley flavor. It creates a little more malic acid. A lot of folks like a green tea. It's a little bit lighter. Sometimes it can ferment a little faster. It is a little more antimicrobial, and so your culture will adjust. We like to do the blend because then you get the benefits of all of them, but feel free to experiment. And people say, well, can I flavor in primary? And for our basic best practices, we say no, but the reality is once you have those extra SCOBYs lining up in your hotel, you can make any kind of experimental batch you want. And our book and our blog has lots of ideas for what you can do, whether it's you know, using different sugar sources like maple syrup or piloncillo or something like that, or if it's using hibiscus or only ginger in your primary with no tea at all. Of course, how that impacts the culture and things over time may be positive, maybe negative, and that's why we use one of our spare SCOBYs.
Okay. Yeah, I've never flavored the first batch. I barely even done a second flavoring. I'm like, I'm good. I'm done. But we're going to cover it today, which I like.
So next up, we have our 1 cup of sugar, and you might be thinking, oh my gosh, isn't sugar the devil? Everyone's telling me not to eat sugar. Sugar is addictive, this, that, and the other. And I always say, consider the source. When we say sugar, because it tends to be applied to everything and anything, are we talking about a highly processed product like a high fructose corn syrup? Or are we talking about an ancient grass that for over 5,000 years human beings have been consuming? And it's not to say that even cane sugar can't have a negative impact. Again, poison's in the dose. But sugar is a nutrient for all life, including microbes. Now, the thing about cane sugar, and here I'm just going to stir until I don't hear it jangling anymore. I'm also going to stir in hopes and dreams and love, right? These microbes are alive.
And you took the tea bag out already?
I'm sorry?
Did you take the tea bag out?
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh, I missed that. Okay. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Here it is. We took the tea bag out.
Energy. I messed it all.
And it's in the hot water, so it makes the sugar dissolve quicker. So if we were doing Jun with the raw honey, instead of adding the honey at this point, we'd add the water because that's going to bring the temperature down further because raw honey has its own host of microbes as well, and they want that 108 or lower temperature too.
So, and important to point out, the SCOBY is eating the sugar, really. It's not, there's barely any sugar left really when it's done, correct?
If you were to taste this right now, you would be like, it's so sweet, it's disgusting. But you're absolutely correct. And here's what happens. This is the symbiosis, this is the beauty of it, is the yeast create an enzyme called invertase that cleaves our disaccharide, right? So sucrose is made up of both fructose and glucose. That yeast enzyme cuts it in half, puts it into those monosaccharide components so that the microbes, the bacteria, are able to consume because they can't consume the more complex sugars. They have to be broken down. Now, here's the thing about the sugar grams you're looking at on the label of kombucha. And you're like thinking, oh, this is so high. It's not actually because it's just the word sugar. So it isn't breaking out to you saying, hey, the amount of sucrose versus fructose and glucose, which have a lower glycemic impact on the body, none of that is teased out in detail. And so you're not comparing apples to apples when you're looking at the sugar grams on a soda and the sugar grams on a kombucha.
Okay.
Here's what I forgot was my pitcher of water. So let me fill this up.
I was gonna ask another question. Oh no, I forgot it. Oh well.
It's almost ready.
Okay.
We're not gonna use a full gallon.
Oh, I know what I was gonna ask you. So you can feel like a little buzzed from kombucha, and do you want to explain more why that is?
1 second.
The cliffhanger.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I couldn't hear you over the water.
I feel like, you know, with kombucha, you can feel a little buzzed. At least I can. I'm little. Sometimes it has a warning on it too, right? About
They have to, because all fermented foods and drinks do contain trace amounts of alcohol. This is, again, one of the amazing defense mechanisms. So let's talk about alcohol, because I've already indicated I enjoy it. Alcohol is a preservative, right? You have a bottle of it in your kitchen or in your bathroom cabinet, and what's it for? Sterilizing wounds. Why? Because it's antimicrobial. So the trace amounts of alcohol created by the fermentation process is a defense mechanism. It's preventing pathogens from being able to enter the brew. Second, alcohol is our original medicine. There were herbs that we couldn't extract their nutrients simply by boiling it like a tea or tisane. We would infuse it into alcohol. Alcohol extracts all of those nutrients. This is our cough syrups, our tinctures, right? The benefit of when we consume them in this form is alcohol also relaxes. It thins the blood. It makes it easier for your body to absorb those nutrients. And what's the root cause of all dis-ease? It's stress. And so whether that stress is coming from a poor diet or because you actually have an illness or whatever, minimizing stress is always going to have a positive effect on the body. Now, the buzz that you're feeling from kombucha very often is not from the alcohol. It is in such trace amounts that it typically is not intoxicating and doesn't have a negative impact on the body. But the B vitamins, right? We've heard of niacin flush, where folks who take a B vitamin shot and they feel that warm rush. That is what you're experiencing from the kombucha. Now, that said, right, some folks are allergic to alcohol, some are allergic to strawberries, to peanuts, to shrimp, to anything. Almost anything can have someone allergic to it. So folks who are incredibly sensitive to alcohol, they might notice the alcohol from kombucha. But more often than not, it's a feeling that, first of all, doesn't last very long, as enjoyable as it is, doesn't impair your ability to function, and it's something that just, you get like that little whoo.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is kind of a flush. That's a great point. Okay. So we filled up the rest of the gallon of just with cool water. Okay.
That's right. Now we're at room temperature. I stick my hand in there. It feels room temperature. Okay. Now I'm ready to take my SCOBY. Yes, look at this. She's a fatty. She's a beaut. And she's firm and dense, right?
Yeah, take a picture of this. So, so cute.
She smells amazing. Woo! And now we're going to float her in here. And she might fall to the bottom of the jar. She happens to be floating, but she could sink to the bottom and people go, oh my gosh, my SCOBY went to the bottom of the jar. Is it dead? The answer is no. The mother can be anywhere in the vessel, and that's what we call her. Here's our strong starter liquid we're pouring on top.
Okay.
We pour it on top because we want the liquid hasn't completely acidified yet. And so by pouring it on top, we're just trying to prevent any sort of surface organisms that might be attracted to that delicious sweet tea from finding a place to land. I feel like I was saying something else before that, but in any case, and this is it. This is how we make it. Oh, right. So the SCOBY can be anywhere. And what happens is when the yeast start their process of breaking the sugars apart, it creates CO2 or bubbles or effervescence, as well as alcohol. And so it's the alcohol that the bacteria are consuming and turning into those organic acids. So when we look at an alcohol chart for kombucha, it's going to initially increase as the yeast is doing its process, but then it decreases as the alcohol is converted to the organic acids. And that's why doing a continuous brew, like these vessels here, it's a larger batch, we're only taking about 50% out, it creates more of those acids, which are healthier for us. But if we did 30 days in here, this might taste like pure vinegar. And so we're tempering the flavor in the continuous brew by adding sweet tea. Adding sweet tea, while it's already fermented, these later stage acids actually leads to them creating more of those acids, which is why we like continuous brew as the easiest, safest, healthiest way to make kombucha.
Oh, that's like an advanced move, but not really, because it's
exactly easy. It is and it isn't. It's just more of an investment to get the equipment, but honestly, it's a really simple process once you get it up and running.
Oh, I might like to have that. That sounds like for my temperament better to deal with.
It's super flexible. Like, let's say you forgot about it because life got busy. Now it's acting like a hotel. It's super easy. You drain some of the sour stuff out. Now you've got kombucha vinegar for your salad dressing, your marinade, your hair tonic, your facial toner, your bath, however you want to use it, your drain cleaner. You top it off with a little bit of sweet tea. Now you're back to your kombucha in just a couple of days. You don't have to go through the whole process of starting everything over again. So it's really flexible. It works with your pace.
Okay. I want to ask you a question about alcohol. You might not have the answer, but I like a debate I recently had. So alcohol has calories, but not sugar. And I'm not sure how that is happening. Do you know?
How alcohol has calories, but not from sugar?
Yeah. It doesn't make sense. I got to research it a little more. Because my friend was like, it doesn't have sugar, but I'm like, where does the calorie come from if there's no?
Well, it's got to come from the sugar, right? Because the sugar is what's converting into the alcohol. That's got to be the base calorie. It might not be the same, right? Because a calorie is just the amount of energy it takes to raise water to boiling.
Well, or that
you our science class back in the day.
Use like from the food, yeah. How much is available energy? Maybe it's a sugar alcohol, so they don't count it as a sugar. Do you think
it could
on
be.
A label? Okay.
Well, and alcohol isn't required to have a nutrition panel.
No. So when I was having this debate, I was like, I feel like this is not adding up. But it doesn't have like hard alcohol. Doesn't have like, I don't know, additional sugar. Like it's not the same as beer or wine. It's different, but it still has calories. But then I was reading.
I think everything has calories. It's distilled. So I don't know what that does to the calorie at that point. But it definitely, like drinking alcohol, makes you feel warm. So there is some sort of energy being created by it.
And apparently it doesn't spike your blood sugar, but it does mess up your blood sugar over time. So I'm like, it's just a lot of contradiction. I feel like going on.
Well, I think we can go back to poisons in the dose. Are you having a glass at dinner, or are you killing the bottle? Right? Those are going to have very different impacts on your body over time.
Yeah, and if you've had food and that kind of thing. So I have about 5 more minutes. Do you want to talk about flavoring?
I do, but let me say one more neato thing about kombucha and alcohol. Sure. That is, it actually curbs your cravings for alcohol.
Oh, I can see that.
Becomes what I call alcohol is a vital nutrient, because when we're consuming it in this living form from fermented foods, and I'm not just saying from kombucha, but all fermented foods, and every culture has fermented foods as one of their chief things that's really important to them. Those trace amounts of alcohol actually help our body. And, again, it's a personal choice. I have friends and family who are in AA. They choose to drink kombucha. It doesn't trigger them. I know other people, they don't even want to go near it. They don't want mouthwashes with alcohol. So again, it's that personal choice. But my personal consumption of alcohol has completely plummeted. And it's because I'm just getting what I need from the kombucha, and it doesn't cause me to then, crave more higher quantities of alcohol.
Yeah, and it does give you some sensation. So like I was talking about feeling kind of high from it or something. And sometimes we do want something to kind of shift our state, but then you don't want to be, hungover or whatever from it. So yeah, I think it's a perfect alternative. That's a great point.
My last thing about it is because a lot of beer and wine is pasteurized. Imagine if we were having those ferments without pasteurization, we might derive more of a nutritional value from it and therefore consume less of it. So again, we're going back to the feedback loops, to those little plugs in our body where the nutrition comes in. And when we give an organism what it needs to thrive, it will. And I feel like pasteurization turns it into a controlled substance, because you don't get the nutritional benefit of it. And so your body is just like on a different type of loop with it.
Oh, true. You keep craving it. I made wine once, Hannah. You'll be proud of me. When I lived in South America, we made wine from this dairy and a tree. It was all right. And it was not pasteurized. So probably was, healthier than a lot of wine. Cool. Okay.
No sulfites.
Yeah, it was, it was old school. We smushed it up with our feet. They weren't grapes. There was different kind of berry that was really abundant down there.
Okay, and then you asked me about flavoring though, so I want to make sure we get to it. So we talked about syrup. So like elderberry syrup. There's also a video on our root beer syrup, which you can do syrup, you can do powder, you can do individual ingredients. Excuse me. That's the fermentation.
Root beer syrup sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to get that one too. Okay.
And it's the real roots, and so you get root beer is a Native American traditional beverage that helps the body in a lot of different ways. So this is the really cool thing about kombucha. It is so versatile. It is so flexible. We have 280 flavor inspirations in the book, but because of the trace amounts of alcohol, because of the acids in the vinegar, it is very effective at extracting nutrients from whatever you infuse into it. So the more knowledge you have about herbal nutrition and, herbs for specific benefits, and I'll say this, ginger kombucha is the most popular flavor, not just for flavoring at home, but being sold as a product. People love ginger. We just have a really happy relationship with it, except for the people who hate it, right? But ginger is just, it's a rhizome. It's got these great digestive properties. We infuse a little into the kombucha. It picks up all that great benefit for us. And so again, if you're doing your turmeric, throw a little black pepper in there. But a lot of times we'll do a fruit and an herb, or a fruit and a spice. That's a common way to start with flavoring your kombucha. But again, it's mix and match, and a little bit goes a long way. So this packet looks tiny. It's actually got 10 to 20 servings in it. So it doesn't look like much, but it will get many bottles of booch infused. And again, you can get super creative. We've done savory kombuchas with like mushrooms and bacon and, peppers and things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a beverage. But again, that vinegar nature of kombucha, which we use for salad dressings and things that are savory, it actually works really well with it. And then there's things like bitter stuff that actually gets mellowed by the booch. So like hops. I love putting hops in my booch, especially with a little sour, grapefruit or lemon. Again, you think sour and sour, but it actually marries together in a really beautiful flavor. So especially if you're trying to avoid beer, but want that beer-like flavor, infusing with a little bit of hops and some citrus, you're just going to end up with a really delicious kombucha.
Awesome. Okay, so take us on the timeline. Now we've got it in there. We're waiting in the 75 degrees. How long does it take about?
Week, 10 days, 14 days, all of this is predicated on your brewing conditions. As I mentioned before, that's temperature, as well as your taste preference. So right now it is super sweet. Every day it's going to slowly start to shift as the sugars break down, as they convert into the CO2 and the ethanol, as the ethanol is converted into the organic acid. So the longer we ferment it, the tangier the flavor. The warmer it is, as we mentioned, kombucha like 75 to 85, with 80 being our sweet spot. If you're in a place where your climate is much hotter, or in the summer, you'll notice your kombucha is fermenting a lot faster. And so in the winter, even with the heater, it still goes a little bit slower because there's also changes in air pressure, in humidity, and things like that. So it's just naturally going to have a slightly different cycle time depending on the time of year, and also depending on how sweet or tart you like it. A lot of folks start out sweeter, but because your body actually craves, right, the flavors of health and digestion are sour and bitter. I'm not saying we have them all the time, but having, bitters before you eat helps to open and start the whole digestive process. Having a little bit of sour helps us to break things down. This is your sauerkraut on a Reuben right there. That's like, how do you eat all that meat? Well, you got to have a little fermented there to help break it down. It's also why our fermented foods are often condiments. So it's not about having massive doses of ferments. It's having them in small food-sized doses that help the body naturally digest, process everything so that it can leave your body. So you extract all the nutrients and then you get rid of the stuff you don't need.
So the flavorings we talked about, you said not right away. We wait till our 7 to 14 days. Is that correct? And then what do we do?
We take out, so a new layer will have grown across the top. We take out the mother and the daughter. The daughter is always on top because the mother's always underneath. So why it grows a SCOBY is it's preventing other organisms from getting in there. It's a defense mechanism. So we take that out, and then immediately, like an offering, 1 to 2 cups of our starter liquid. So that's what you're going to use for the next batch. That's sacred, and there's a reason we take it off the top and not the bottom. So anyone who's made kombucha at home, what you'll notice is by the end of it is you have a bunch of yeast or debris at the bottom of the vessel. As we said, it's a symbiosis, but we are the stewards of the balance. Yeast are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're floating around. You can't escape yeast. And so we're trying to nurture the bacteria side because we know the yeast are going to be very strong. And if we get too much yeast, it causes our flavors to sour too quickly, to go off and get funky. So don't drink everything and leave the dregs. Take the liquid off the top, then drink everything for you. You also want the yeast in your bottle because that's how you're going to get your fizz. Oh my gosh, I could probably talk for another hour on this, but long story short, we take that out. We take out our 2 cups of liquid for the next batch. We put our flavorings in our bottle, pour, cap, let them sit at room temperature because that's going to build the fizz. Again, this is natural effervescence, not forced carbonation, which means when you put it in the fridge, because it's cold in there and yeast are temperature sensitive, your bubbles might minimize or go away. You want them to come back, just bring it out of the fridge 15, 20 minutes before you want to drink it. Let it come back up to temperature and the bubbles will return.
Okay, so if you do not flavor it, you can just take out the SCOBYs, right, and put it in a pitcher in the fridge. But if you want to flavor it, you put it in a capped bottle, and there's no time limit there. You can just leave it on the counter.
You can now. Well, there's a
Eventually.
right. If you're drinking it right away, it's fine. Strain it out at the glass. Sometimes you'll munch on the things.
Oh,
if you're like us, so we brew our kombucha. We harvest it when it's still a little sweet. We flavor it for a day or 2. We strain that out and put it into our bottles. Then we let the bottle sit for like 2 weeks. What that does is there's another process that occurs, a third fermentation, if you will, that shifts the sugar profile a little bit differently. It doesn't have as intense an acid flavor. But again, you got to have enough space and the luxury of being able to have that much kombucha around in order to achieve that process. And then we never refrigerate it. So we're just always pouring it over ice if we want it cold.
Okay, cool. And do you have your book handy? You might not.
I do.
Okay. So, you know, we gave you a little sampling, but there's this great book. I'm going to definitely get the syrups going and probably a SCOBY and look into the continuous. I love the syrups, even if you just do that, like it's not quite the same as, but I just love having that around and mix with things. It sounds like so great.
Well, even if you mix the syrups with bubbly water, this is soda. That's the original soda, were fermented herbs and things that we just put over bubbly water.
And somebody is asking, are you supposed to eat the drink? She doesn't like drinking the yeasty part at the bottom of the bottles. Did you? Okay. No rules here, Maria.
That's right. What works for you? Don't force yourself if it isn't tasting good or making you feel good.
Well, this has been such an awesome demonstration. I'm glad we have a recording of it because people are really going to enjoy it. I think often people just like to see, because if you're just like, oh, make my own kombucha, that sounds impossible. But when you see it, you're like, oh, that's not so hard. You just have this jar. And I love that it's just going to make sure you have the ingredients and then just go step by step. And then after you do it a few times, you're like an expert. You don't need to keep checking all the time.
Absolutely. And even with the continuous brew, once you invest in having the vessel and the heaters and the whatnots, really all you're paying for is tea and sugar. So it might feel like, oh, this is an investment up front, but the reality is you're then making kombucha for pennies a glass. And so if you're someone who's buying it by the case at Costco or wherever, that might be an easier way for you to save money.
That's a good point. You might feel like, oh, this is expensive, but if you are buying kombucha or other kind of drinks to entertain your mouth and whatever, like this could be a great, healthier way to do it and cheaper in the long run. Awesome.
If your family, like kids, love kombucha, they go crazy for it. They get so excited by it. Soon you can train them to make the kombucha, and now there's one less thing that you have to do. It also makes a great science project for anyone who's doing homeschool, or it feels like everybody's doing homeschool these days, but there's there's just an infinite way to play with and have fun with these ferments. And we miss that generation of handing it down to us. We've taught ourselves, and now hopefully we're passing that on so that chain remains unbroken.
Definitely. Okay, so I reposted the link to the recipe guide, and then you can see the name of her main website there in that link, and then you could go to the shop page to shop. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for putting in the time to get this all organized. And we always have this on the YouTube later if you guys want to go back and see it, and we'll have some notes there as well. So you can, get your stuff and then maybe watch it again if you like. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. See you next week. Bye, Hannah.
Bye.